Drinking. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our new episode of Vox Vomitus. If you are watching us live, you are seeing that we are here at an earlier time for us in the United States, but that is because we are with a very special guest today, Miss C.J. Cooke. Joining us today, of course, are my Vox Vomitus vixens, Miss Trisha Ridinger McKee, author of the Beyond series, as well as her Christmas collection, All I Want for Christmas, as well as Allison Martine, author of the Bourbon books. So, oh, are you drinking bourbon? Isn't it like 10 a.m.?
It's in the eggnog. Shh.
So we're starting the show off right. I'm like, I thought it was morning there. So, CJ, thank you for being here with us. Can you tell our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I am C.J. Cooke. I'm the author of The Nesting, which was published in the United Kingdom and the US and Canada in the fall. I think it was published first in the US in September. And my previous novel out there was I Know My Name. It was published in 2018. I also write under my name, Carolyn Jess-Cooke. I write poetry. I lecture at the University of Glasgow, where I live. And it's a pleasure to be here.
So I'm always fascinated by the two names. Allison is a two-name author. I love it when
two
people
pen names. Not most have two names because Jennifer's like Jennifer and Gordon. That's three. That's not what you mean.
Right.
Just clarifying.
Yes. So I love that. CJ, how do you describe The Nesting? Because I was describing it on Facebook to somebody and I said it was gothic, it was psychological suspense, it was Nordic noir, and it was, I think I threw in like architecture thriller. And somebody was like, is that a category? I'm like,
it is now.
It is now.
I think that's a really good, I really struggle with fitting into categories. I just write what I want to write, and I'm interested in psychological fiction. I'm interested in the gothic. I'm interested in architecture, and I'm interested in motherhood, and so all of those things kind of just are in the book. I noticed that my books are frequently reviewed as a little bit different because they are. I don't like fitting easily into a genre, which is, I suppose, a bit of a problem. But yeah, because I like to read books that don't fit easily in a particular category. I like to read books that are quite interesting and different, and that's what I write.
So I love that. And I forgot that I also had in my list of what your book was, Nordic folklore. It's like Nordic folklore architecture thriller.
Yes.
and somebody said, what does that mean? And I said, there's elk, but there are also like solar panels and really interesting architecture inside caves. And they were like, wow.
The folklore is definitely there. I remember when I had the first draft to my editor, and I had a little bit of folklore in there, and she's like, "We love the folklore," and I was like, "Really?" Because I can do that all day, and she's like, "Oh yeah." And so that found its way in there as well. So she kind of calls it a little fairy, like a fairy tale. Yes. I think fairy tales are wonderful because they can be really interesting and dark, but they don't fit easily into a genre either. So I like that.
Yeah. I had such a good time reading your book because I read a lot of gothic fiction. I read a lot of psychological suspense, and I write gothic fiction and psychological suspense. So there's always that trope of there's a woman who has to go someplace else, whether it's in my book, an island, in your book, she goes to Norway, and then something happens.
Yeah.
But what I loved about your storytelling is that I didn't really know what was going to happen because there was a little bit of a supernatural aspect. There was, a mystery of the dead wife, which I always love the dead wife trope in Gothic books. So did you ever think as you were writing it that you were putting too much, like too many different side things in there?
I don't know. I think it's just how I write. Like I think there is a lot in this book, but yeah, it was just how the story came. I mean, my investment was in the relationships, and I think, you know, I was just very, very invested in those little girls who've lost their mother. It's not a spoiler. And I was invested in the nanny and her story as well, and also in Tom, the architect, and his wife, and that was where my attention was really, with the emotional story, is exploring those relationships and how they're all changed by each other. So yeah, that was what I hoped that the reader would come out with, was that appreciation for those relationships.
Well, I did, so I can only imagine everybody else did. Since there was so much going on in your book, so many different world building things, do you plan those things out, or are you a pantser like the rest of us here, and it just happens, and then all of a sudden there's an elk, and you're like, oh, I got to go with this?
I think, you know, I used to be a pantser. When I started publishing my novels in 2011, and under Carolyn Jess-Cooke, and then I just used to write with, I had a sort of idea, usually very high concept, and then I just went for it, and that was an exciting way to write, because you're finding out as you write, and I really still love that. But I've become a planner. That said, I like to plan, but in a sort of elastic way, so that the architecture, if you like, gives me space to, because you can plan all day long and then something doesn't work. You know, something that sounds good in theory does not translate well in the story or in the page. So I like it. And then sometimes, you know, like, you can experiment with an idea that just emerges as you write, and it becomes really central. So in this book, for instance, there's a character called Dora, who you might know, and Dora just emerged, and I love Dora. That was not planned. So it's fun when things that you don't plan find their way there, and I just find that having that structure allows me to sort of figure out how to not insert things, that sounds too like Lego or something, but you know, it provides a sort of template or a framework, because I remember writing this and thinking, what comes next? And then I referred to my index cards and was like, oh, that's a good idea. So yeah, I think, you know, it's just about keeping track as well, sometimes, of the overall structure.
I wanted to ask, when you started as a pantser and then moved to a plotter, was that an intentional decision, or did you just find that your process was changing as you became more adept at writing books? Or did you say at some point, this pantsing isn't working for me, I need to learn to do something more structural ahead of time so that it serves me as I'm actually writing?
Well, I had an experience that maybe will make other people feel better. With my second novel, I got my edits back, and they basically wanted me. I ended up having to delete over half the novel, and it was such a painful process to have to do that. I mean, it was so tough to not have to delete half of it, but to know which parts of it to delete. And I just felt, yeah, it was so tough. And I suppose I just, on hindsight, the real lessons learned was, I thought, you know, in future I can see how I could avoid that. If I had maybe just thought of that beforehand. I mean, because we all want to just write the perfect novel from the outset, yeah. But I did sort of reflect, and I thought, right, in future, I think I can still be creative, and I can still be surprised by what comes on the page. But as long as I kind of think of the framework and really think it through, then that will save time.
See,
and it has.
Good. So our show is called Vox Vomitus, which is fake Latin for word vomit. And as pantsers, we always will jokingly say, what part of your draft are you on? And we're like, just like the part where it's just word vomit, where you're just typing and you're like, I don't know where it's going. I thought I knew where it's going. I might be like driving myself into a brick wall right now. And I often think, would it be easier to plan this out and know what I was doing? And so I was curious if you had and you obviously did a very traumatic experience where you had to lose half a book.
Yeah. And I think there is a real, value, and it's essential to understand. I always say this to my students, that you've got to have the writing or the word vomit, and then you've got to have the editing. And if you conflate the two, there's problems. It's not, but people who are perfectionists struggle with that. And I think I am a bit of a perfectionist, but I think at least if I have an idea of the plan, the shape of the story, then I can kind of, I don't know, it gives me a sense of where to go and how to build the narratives and weave those together. So it's my process, I think, is a bit of a hybrid one. I'm not married to the plan. Yeah.
I think they're calling that plantsing now.
Plantsing.
Yeah. The kids.
We can portmanteau anything. 2 words all become one.
It's the smush name. But you said index cards, and I guess that would be a very helpful idea. In my brain, I always think if you're planning, it has to be one of two things: an outline, which is horrifyingly scary to me, or one of those like serial killer walls where there's just a million Post-its and strings.
People like that intimidate me, because this is honestly, I'm like, I feel like I'm not a writer because I don't have that.
Yes.
This is my office space. I have the smallest office in the whole world. It's basically like in our closet, in a little kind of what used to be a cupboard or a bookcase, and you can see I've got plants and pictures. I've got no serial killer charts. No, I like index cards because I like spreading them over the dining table and seeing like the kind of overview of that shape, and then moving things around and seeing how things will come together, and it just gives me a real lovely brainstorming approach, so that your first idea may not be the best one. So by looking at it, then I'm like, well, what if does it have to be set here, or does this person, because I started writing this novel where this person was a scientist, and after a while I was like, because obviously that's going to involve all this research in a field that I am not a scientist, and then I'm like, why do I have her as a scientist? And I think having that kind of, that critique can save time before you're
become.
Sorry?
If she wasn't a scientist, what did you turn her into?
A cleaner?
Oh my gosh.
It's very different. I love it.
She can be on this ship. She can totally be on this ship. She does not need to be a scientist to be here. She can be there as a cleaner. So, and that's perfect, because I also love writing about people who are working class. Mm-hmm. I guess I don't know what you call it, if it's the same in the US, but I like the underdog. I like writing from both, because I work in academia and have done since 2002. But I grew up in a what's called a council estate, very poor, very, very working class. And I love the underdog. So yeah, that to me, because I've no problem researching science all day long if that's essential. But if it's not, then it's a waste of time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I feel like I would never create a scientist character just because I would be overwhelmed with the research. I have a science aspect to my new work in progress, and I'm already overwhelmed, and I've enlisted somebody who is an immunologist and is a scientist who's like, if you want me to research things for you, I'm like, yes, please, because I went down a rabbit hole on Google and was just like, I don't know where to look in medical journals.
Yeah.
That's boring.
One of my characters in one of my earlier books was a child psychiatrist, And I didn't even know at the time that there's this huge difference between psychology and psychiatry until and that's a big thing, and so, I did loads of research and visited and interviewed psychiatrists and psychologists and got fact-checking reads, but it can break your brain, like having to research that heavily. You can just be, you have to make sure it's essential, otherwise it's...
Well, and I was just laughing when you turned your scientist into a cleaner, because Jen has actually done research on laundry. So she's even researched cleaning when it's a historically done thing. So she'll find a way to research pretty much anything, even if you think, I think we all know how to do this. But I mean, the first step is don't eat Tide Pods. I don't really know what step 2 is, but that was step 1.
That's the only step, really. And then make sure whatever happens, it's clean afterwards. That's the 2 steps. So, I'm going to throw this over to Trisha. Trisha, do you have any questions for CJ?
I do. I'm wondering, in your writing, I think we all have our strong points that we're aware of and our weak points. What would you say is your strength when it comes to writing, and what is your weakness?
Oh gosh.
Ooh, okay.
I hope that my strength is my language, because I didn't start as a novelist. I started as a poet. I am a poet, but now I'm a novelist also. But I really pay attention to the language I'm using, even though it's 100,000 words. I hope that's a strength. I don't know.
I hope so too.
And I really pay attention to things like voice, and if the voice isn't right, I can't start. So it's all well and good planning, but essentially the voice has to be right. And I have abandoned very beautifully planned projects because I just couldn't get the voice. And I guess my weakness, what my weakness be? I don't know. I'm sure I have many weaknesses. I don't know how to define it. I'm constantly trying to challenge myself. I mean, I think most novelists must feel embarrassed by their previous works. And I know I do. I look back at books and think, could I not have written that better? Could I not have, I'm never happy.
Yes.
So that's the perfectionism you were talking about, though, earlier, because there are people, I'm sure, who will never look back at them. I think we've talked to a few who are like, I don't reread those. They're done. I've written 7 novels since then. Close that door. I think that's a different kind of personality type where there is that reflection on the past work. And also, I'm assuming if you've written more than one thing, making sure that whatever you didn't quite nail in the first book or in the prior book, how can you improve on that in the next book and make the reader's experience better the next time?
Exactly that. I'm constantly, I do read my Goodreads reviews and Amazon reviews, which I know it's awful. It's hideous. I don't know why I torture myself. I must think, hey, I'm having too good a day. I must go and read my reviews. Because
they worse.
If I get a wonderful review, it's like, oh, that's nice. And if I get a horrible review, it just can destroy me. But sometimes I do like the feedback, and I think it's important. And so I take it on board, and I'm constantly, I take so long editing now. I take so much longer editing than I used to. And I can't believe that I used to think that I could get away with not editing as much as I do now. It's ridiculous.
How many drafts do you think you go through? Like, how many edits? How many?
I don't even count. I don't even count because it's too many. And
it's not. Your book was beautiful. So whatever you did, you should be doing
many for her, because she's just like, I had to do all of them. For you got the beautiful finished product. For her, she's like, the number was like this, and 8 on the side.
I always feel like there's this arc in editing where the first draft is vomit draft. Second draft, you think, I could win an award. Third draft, you're like, probably not. Fourth draft, you're like, oh, it's not that bad. But then fifth draft, sixth draft, you're like, are these sentences? I hate this story. And
Yeah.
And then you keep going back to it. Do you keep going back and going back even through all of those, like, I think I might hate it now? How do you talk yourself back into loving it?
I don't think I hate it. I actively hate it. I mean,
Yeah.
I despise it. I feel sort of nauseous when I read it. But I think over time, through experience, I understand that that's just part of the process. So I mean, I still have many bad days where I just think, maybe I'm not a writer. Maybe I should just go and teach yoga or something, because clearly I can't write. But you know, we all have those days. Yes. And I have to say, with the nesting, because Lexi's voice was so strong from the beginning, I think this wasn't as painful as some books. I just loved it. I loved writing her. It was still difficult to write, as writing is, but I loved writing her. I could have written her for 5 books.
She's a great character. She's interesting as all get out. And again, not a spoiler, but not a super reliable narrator off the bat. I loved her. And I remember halfway through the book thinking, gosh, like I would read another book with her. Like either a prequel, I don't care. I just liked her character so much. And there was so much there. So yeah, I get that. When the character's strong enough, you can buckle down and go through all those edits just for the love of the character alone.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to ask about the editing process, if it's different when you're in a collaborative state versus some of the stuff that maybe you're doing by yourself, because when you got that book back, the one that made you more of a planter because they told you to remove it, because I'm assuming that was somebody else telling you this has to go. Yeah. How does somebody else telling you what you need to do? How is that different than your own process of looking at it and trying to determine, all right, I need to hone this. How do you interpret when it's somebody else telling you fix this and you're going, the whole thing has to go? Can I just start over? Because I don't want to do all the things you're telling me to do.
Yeah. So that book was The Boy Who Could See Demons, and it was contracted. And my editor at the time, I mean, I did trust her. I don't imagine that I was thrilled with the suggestion, but I did trust her. And when I was editing it and sending her kind of installments of the edits, which I did really quickly. I mean, I'd say I had to cut over half, but I actually did those edits in like 4 weeks. Which looking back, I look back in I guess I was 32. I don't know. I just feel like I had much more energy back then. I was
going to say, 32. I think I could crank out that in 4 weeks.
Yeah, but I had three little kids, like little babies, and I just honestly, I think, what was I on? But I was able to turn it around in 4 weeks. And as she's reading, and then she's emailing back like, "Oh, this is amazing!" So that was good, and I really paid attention to her response, and that helped. That really helped guide me, because I have to say, I felt like I was writing blind. If I hadn't had that feedback, when you're trying to implement instructions, or not instructions, but someone has said you must change this, and obviously I was happy with what I'd written. So, but it does take, I think it takes experience. Now I can do it a lot better, a lot easier. But that's taken 10 years.
Oh, wow. 10 years and a bottle of wine. More than a bottle of wine.
I've spoken to authors like Samantha Downing, and they, although, you know, Samantha Downing, she's on her 3rd book now, but her debut, but prior to that, she'd written, I think she said she wrote 12 books before that, or it was her 12th book. And I really take my hat off to people who have done that, although they've maybe published, you know, 1 or 2 books, they've written so many more, because it does take, I think, that dedication to acquire certain skills. And one of them is, I think, just understanding that the process does sometimes feel painful.
Yes.
Yeah, we're all like, yeah. Yes, it does. Especially during 2020, I feel like it's just,
oh gosh, yes.
Like, so did you feel the nesting came out at the end of September here in the United States? I think it was September 29th.
That's
Did
right.
you feel this debut was different than your others because it was like in this weird netherland that we live in now where we're just only squares on a screen?
Yeah. I don't think there's any authors who, are thrilled about being published in a pandemic. It's
We're all like, no.
no, it's not easy, but I don't know. There's sort of statistics that people are reading more, but certainly, to have bookshops closed as they were over here, and it's not ideal. But and even in terms of trying to write, I mean, I did write this year, but I felt like everything took 5 times longer.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry. I'm like, what is that?
We're
I
all
have
just
all the
relating.
time in the world, but
Yeah, and making sure it's not just like, has my brain been broken by 2020 and we're all just counting down until then. We know it won't magically change in 2021. The ball won't drop and the curtain lifts and everything's reset to normal. But I think we're all just hoping it'll be a little bit easier. And as time goes on, our brains will gelatinize, maybe.
I hope so.
I hope so.
But I have heard like some of my friends who are authors are saying the same thing, that they were late in submitting their work. And so I mean, I have a novel coming out next year, which I'm doing the edits for right now, but it has been like, I don't know, wading through treacle.
Yes. I love the word treacle. Sorry. Like treacle.
As an American, I had to look that up when I first read it in a Terry Pratchett book because I had no idea what treacle was. We don't have treacle here.
It's molasses.
I know, but we don't call it treacle here.
I know. I had a whole debate in my head in my last book because there was a scene with molasses.
Yeah, the
molasses scene, which, spoiler alert, there's molasses.
There's molasses.
But the family is originally from Northern Ireland. And I was like going on and on going, should it be treacle? Should it be molasses? He's been in the United States a while. Is it molasses? Is it treacle? And then I messaged some of the people that I know that consider themselves Victorianologists. And they were just like, this is not even a question that you should be asking. Who cares? And I'm like, oh, okay. I'm glad I sent out 10 emails about treacle or molasses. This is why my show is called Word Vomit.
Well, that's as bad as I'd gotten a book that was, I think I got it someplace like Ross or TJ Maxx. So not a bookstore that normally carries a wide variety, but it was a Jamaican cookbook. And it was amazing. But it had ingredients that I'm like, what's an aubergine? What? It's an eggplant, but nobody calls it out here. So it's the whole cross the border and then change the name of the food. And I completely get confused. And they need like a translation in the back. You're American. You don't call anything.
We speak American.
I know. We speak American and we don't understand that.
I have a question for you, CJ. Is there a genre or a type of book or a type of scene that you feel like you never want to write or feel like you can't write? Like erotica or
probably erotica. That's probably. I'm actually
because you're British.
I don't know. I don't know. I just.
I'm more comfortable.
Or I don't know. I feel cynical about all that. I'm in a moment in my life that I'm not. I'm just bored by that. I want something that challenges me. So yeah. I don't know. I would be up for writing romance. Or I don't know. Sometimes I have some ideas and I think that would make a really lovely lighthearted comedy. But then invariably, someone comes in with a severed head or, an elk comes in.
An elk.
So I don't know. I think there's the idea and then there's the execution. So I don't know. I think I always incline towards dark stuff somewhere along the way.
Well, and I couldn't help it, Jen, when you said what she wouldn't do. My first thought was elk erotica. And I thought, is that a thing?
It probably is. But don't look it up. Do it under use somebody else's computer for that.
Yeah. I think my research already would get me into trouble. So
I tend to write dark, and my current work in progress, when I first thought of it, I was like, it's a rom-com, except it's dystopian. But as I'm writing it, there's less comedy in it. And so I'm like giving it to people to read, and they were like, "You said this was going to be a comedy," and I'm like, "But isn't it?" And they're like, "No." I'm like, "Shoot! Then I have to like rebrand this as I don't know."
We've had a conversation of what's a rom-com and what comedy, and that since comedy is so subjective, you could be laughing up a storm, and all your readers are going, "What the heck?"
I was laughing.
And so maybe this is your version of a rom-com, but maybe don't put it in those categories when you're trying to market it.
I had the opposite experience, because when I was writing The Nesting, I actually tonally, or in terms of the tone, I thought it would be very serious. But Lexi, when she started to talk, was very funny.
She is funny.
And
she's funny, and she's talking about things that are not funny, but I was still like chuckling, which is why I loved her so much. I'm like, oh, she's twisted. I love her.
Yes, twisted. That is the word. But I just didn't anticipate that. My plan was not that, and so, but I loved that, so I went with it. But I kept thinking, this doesn't feel like it should. This feels too humorous to be a gothic thriller. So it's nice when that happens.
Yeah, and I think that it kind of carries the reader through the story, because they fall in love with the character, and they see kind of how he or she changes over time by experience. And you did a great job with that.
Oh, thank you.
And I loved Dora.
I did too. When I was in Norway, because I did a lot of research for this book in Norway, and I this time 2 years ago, I was in the Arctic, and I went right to the top of Norway, just on the Russian border. And we went to this little fishing village, and obviously it's pitch black, and it's like there's 40 residents in this little town, but there was an art gallery in this fishing village, like there's nobody there. It was so surreal. And she had these most amazing Arctic scenes, but she also had created little figures. I wish I had it here, but I bought this little, I guess, crow raven thing, and because it just reminded me of Dora. That was who Dora was in my mind. So yeah.
So spoiler alert: Dora's a bird, everyone. Yeah. A beautiful raven.
But she fully had a personality. So
she did. So I was in Alaska once, and we were again in like this tiny little town where there was nothing, and there was an art gallery.
I know.
And I remember buying just like this weird sculpture that was made of driftwood, and I'm like, this is definitely what I need. And then I brought it home, and I realized it looked exactly like a penis.
Oh, she needed a Jen.
And my now husband and I looked at it in our room, and we're like, did we buy a penis sculpture in Alaska?
Wow.
So there's that. At least you got a beautiful raven.
I did.
Honestly.
Yeah, that's the better story.
Mm-hmm.
More inspirational.
Well, and I'm just jealous that you got to go where you were writing about, and not just lockdown, but not all writers have the ability to go these places. And obviously, if they're writing about something set in outer space, they're probably not going there anyway, unless they've got like an in with Tesla. But otherwise, I love that you're like, I'm going to go to these places and feel these places. What would you do though? Are you then limiting yourself by places you can go, or are you open to writing to places that you're going, well, I'm not going to get down to Australia right now. Can I still write in Australia, or would you pick someplace else?
No, I think there's so much now that you can do online. So a book that I published in the UK but hasn't come out yet in the US, part of it is set in Mont Blanc in the French-Italian Alps. And I am not a hill walker. At all, and you know, and I really had to sit and think, because I'd been to some of the places in the book, but I hadn't been to Mont Blanc. And I found on YouTube that people put cameras on their helmets and will go climbing. So I literally watched hundreds of hours of footage of people climbing, and emailed a climber and got information. So I researched it, and I probably benefited more from that than if I had done the climb myself.
Because you would be scared and crying.
And
I would be. I would be crying.
Yeah. Well,
lungs bursting. Yeah, no good.
these are people, I think, you know, these are experts. These are people who are so seasoned in climbing, and you know, so it would take me years to sort of get to that point. So yeah, that was okay for me to research. But for Norway, I felt like I needed to be there, and I'm really glad that I went and because part of it was I went and interviewed a co-director at the Nordic Office of Architecture to get my facts right about building out there, because I knew I can't fudge that. I need to be up to speed with all the legals and the actual logistics of building. Well, it was 2 houses in the end in the book. But yeah, I was so fascinated by the culture and by the landscape and all of that. And I'm really glad I went in that instinct, because I feel it was just transformative. And I was lucky because one of my children is autistic, and for a long time I couldn't leave at all, because she is still attached to me, but she was nonverbal then, so I couldn't even call her to say, "Are you okay? Are you happy?" Whereas now she is verbal, and so that was the first time I'd kind of gone, and it was the longest I'd ever sort of gone, for 12 days, which felt like it was quite scary. But
That is a long time, though. Like 12 days is, yeah. It seems like a long time, especially now.
She was still able to FaceTime me every day, and all my kids did, and shouted at me to come home. But it was terrific. I got so much done. Gosh.
Without 3 people underfoot, I have no idea.
So if anybody who's watching and listening, I would also I love the idea of watching YouTube clips. For some reason, my brain never goes there. I go like right to Google Earth and hone in on like cities and neighborhoods and walk through. This is like for what I'm writing now, there's a portion of it that takes place someplace where I have been, but then there's a chunk of the country where I haven't been. That I'm like, oh, how do I get from someplace I've been to someplace I have been, but I've not been anywhere in between. So Google Earth is another writer's friend.
For sure. Yeah. And I also think, though, there's things that you happen upon, or you know, just being there, there's things that you can't plan. So I think where possible, I would try and go. But yeah, Google Earth is a good tip.
Exactly. Yeah. Especially if you have some like real life experience in between to like to bring the emotion in, but then fill in the blanks with Google Earth, YouTube, anything we can do right now while we all sit in our tiny home offices. Yeah. Mine is my bed. We are out of time, sadly. CJ, thank you for being here. When your next book comes out, we would love to have you back. We'd love to have you back we should have a Battle of the Accents episode where we have all of our Northern England and Northern Irish guests come back, and we just close our eyes and you guys can say words and we'll try to figure out what they mean. So you can be like, treacle. And Allison and I will know that means molasses, but it's molasses. So thank you, CJ.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Vox Vomitus Vixens, Trisha and Allison. Thank you to Roman, Saratin, my husband, and our producer. Thank you, Pam Stack, our executive producer, and everybody at the Global Authors on the Air Network. There's a comment. I can't read it. I'm not wearing my glasses.
I'll hop in. Elisa von Schillerman says, thank you for sharing with us today, CJ. Love listening to you tell your stories and to your voice. Thanks as always, Vox Vixen 52 crew, and you, be wary of those Randy elk.
Oh, Randy elk. So we have 2 weeks off, everybody. Vox Vomitus has 2 weeks off. We will probably pop in for like a mid-Christmas break. Hello with eggnog, where we also tell you our schedule for the next January and February. That's all being finalized now. If you are around tonight, I would say, and that's tonight, Wednesday, December 16th, is it the 16th? At 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Authors on the Air Book of the Year Awards are happening. I am one of the 5 nominated authors. I will be hopefully wearing a sparkle dress that I bought last year right before quarantine. So I don't know if it fits anymore, but it is the dress in my closet that was bought for a red dress gala in March and still has the tags on it. So stay tuned tonight for that. Wish me well, give me comments, congratulate the other people that I am nominated with, because honestly, I feel like it's the Oscars. It's huge. It is an honor to be nominated. So that is tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. CJ, thank you. Thank you, Vox Vomitus Vixens. Everyone, this has been a copywritten podcast. Don't steal us.